Today, you'll come to face a huge realization about the place that you've been living in for quite a while. Some of you, even more than 10 years. I'm guessing that you guys have seen these street signs somewhere in China. Now, for those of you guys who didn't quite catch that, the first one says, pay extra attention when you're driving. That way, your family will be free from worries. Please love and care for the sanitation and build a beautiful water environment. You're a civilized person. Please wait here for the green light and then cross. Now, if you think about the typical idea an average person would have towards language used by the Chinese government, these previous phrases might sound a little bit too nice for what the government might actually say. If you've been living in China for quite a while, though, you may have realized that these were some of the recent street signs in China. Are you guys starting to see where I'm trying to get at about coming to a realization about the place that you've been living in for so long and are still living in right now? Well, let's take a look at some of the older Chinese street signs. Strictly prohibits driving after drinking. Strictly prohibits littering in the river stream. Red light crossing non-motorized vehicle or pedestrian subjected to a fine of 20 RMB. Now, this entire conversation may sound a little radical to you if you don't know much about the Chinese government or haven't lived in China for a long time, or simply haven't paid attention to these kind of things at all. But my point is that all of these street signs altogether do tell the truth quite well. The truth is that the language of the Chinese government has been changing over time from the old, typical stiff administrative language to the new, less forceful, less stiff, and less authoritative language. But why? Why did the language of the Chinese government change? Was the old way not working? Or did the chairman wake up in the morning one day and decided that they should be nicer to their people? Well, if that was the case, I would have had a lot of fun researching, but sadly, no. That's not what happened. So it was time to do some research. But frankly, there wasn't any resource that could give me a solid answer to why the language of the Chinese government changed. So, of course, I had to do some thinking on my own. I pulled out all of the things I learned and all the materials I learned from my previous Chinese classes in the past years to try to come up with a logical reason to why the language of the Chinese government changed. And I had an answer. It's all about the power of the language. It's all about using language, manipulating language, taking advantage of language to lead people to act, think, and behave in the way the government wants them to do in a changed, modernized society. From the social linguistic perspective, the processes and attitudes involved in the modernization of a society is a huge factor in the modernization of the language used in that society. So of course, as the country China has been developing and changing and receiving more foreign ideas as they were going through their own modernization, the government saw that they have to change their language a little bit in order to suit the new society and the new people. The people who no longer will be as submissive as they were back in the old days. This is simply because there are simply more educated people living in China nowadays. And the younger generations are practically running the Chinese society nowadays in the 21st century. And the younger people, they now know that the old Chinese government was successful in brainwashing their people in the past. They know it that when a group of people or the government is trying to brainwash them. And now, collectively, they will resist from being brainwashed. So of course, the government had to shift away from the old administrative language. As you can see, the way government addresses their idea regarding the Chinese-style road crossing, they're now using phrases like 过马路您停3分，不抢1秒. Translated to, don't rush to cross the road, just to snatch that 1 second. But in the past, the same idea was phrased in a much different way, which reads, 严禁红灯过马路, meaning strictly prohibits red light crossing. Again, when the government addressed their policy or their idea regarding drunk driving, they're now saying 喝酒不开车，开车不喝酒. Let's not drive after drinking, and let's not drink if you're driving. Again, the same idea was phrased very differently in the past. 禁止酒后驾驶 strictly prohibits driving after drinking. Also, when the government addresses their policy regarding gender prediction, they're saying things like 生男生女都一样，不然儿子没对象, or 男孩女孩都是宝. These two phrases translate to giving birth to a son or a daughter is the same, or else your son won't have a wife. And both sons and daughters are treasures, which is true. In the minds of the younger people living in China right now, they no longer believe that they should give birth to a boy over a girl, unlike people who used to think like that back in the old days. Again, this same phrase, the policy, was phrased in a weird, slightly more administrative way in the past. 严禁胎儿性别签订 strictly prohibits sex determination of the fetus. As you can see, there is a clear trend in that the Chinese government is using less forceful, less rigid, and less formal language when trying to get their message across to their citizens in the modern days. While the old Chinese government used administrative command to control their citizens in the past, the new Chinese government is using less administrative and less forceful language to persuade or strongly encourage their citizens in the modern days. Clearly, the language of the Chinese government changed drastically. However, the Chinese government still proves to be powerful in their relationship with their citizens. Now, think about it yourself. Would you like your government to be super bossy and force ideas into your mind, or would you like them to be nicer while still being convincing in their ideologies? Well, I would certainly go with the second. The change in the language of the Chinese government completely makes sense if you think about how much this country has been developing and changing in the last few years especially. The modernization of the country naturally led to the modernization of the language used in that country by the authority figure, the Chinese government. So next time you're out on the streets, I suggest you, or strongly encourage you, to pay attention to those street signs and how power still remains in them, although they're no longer administrative. Thank you.